Thank you, Amy. Can you hear me for that gracious invitation? I'm looking around. Who is this person she's talking about? So I didn't need to have this first slide on, but so many of us read the scriptures, and our presumption is that they look very much like what we have in front of us. This is a text that I worked on. I wasn't going to start with this slide, but I work with ancient documents. This is an ancient document. This document was in a fire, and you can see it's not easy to read. So when you work with ancient documents, you're dealing with, this document has massive holes in it. The holes might have been caused by a scar in the animal. This is a skin. We work with papyrus and skins, but also just reading it takes an enormous amount of time, and it can take weeks. I once struggled with a 160-line text, scriptural text, for 18 months, just to decipher, having to use ultraviolet lamps. This one up the top says, apprehensive allocatentes and catchimi et filiis, and it goes on to tell us about these people that were arrested and persecuted by the Romans. But I just wanted people to know, when people read, and they say to me stuff like, well, it says in the Bible. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no Bible at this period. There are different texts floating around all over the world, and you have to work very, very hard to put them together into a coherent state. And this is the kind of stuff we work with. Fragments, bits and pieces. Occasionally, you'll get an entire text, but it's very uncommon. And sometimes an early manuscript may be less good than a late manuscript. So I just thought I'd start with that. Now I have to get back to where I want to be, which... so let me ask you a question. Can anybody tell me the name of this temple? There's a very famous temple, Greco-Roman temple. It's the American Supreme Court. You don't know your history. Now, why am I showing you when I'm talking about Roman persecution in the American Supreme Court? Because I'm going to be talking about the law today, and many of us are unaware of the fact that the American Supreme Court and American law is founded on Roman law and English common law. This is the bronze doors of the American Supreme Court. And up in the extreme right panel is a figure of Justinian, the great Roman emperor of the 6th century, handing over the Codex Juris Civilis, that is the body of Roman law, to his assistant. So our law, and at the very bottom, I should just show you, is the Magna Carta here. So there's Justinian, there's the Magna Carta. So American law derives from Roman law and English common law. The reason I'm saying that is because I'm going to be talking to you about some behaviors that seem deeply unethical and opposed to what you and I might consider legal or lawful or anything else. Oh, this is a picture of myself working in the Sahara on a real Roman temple, and I led an NEH seminar there in 2011. Those are scholars from all over the world who were working with me. But that temple is a very famous temple, and we'll come back to it. So I want to talk a little bit about this man. The subject today is going to be about persecution. And we all know that, in Latin it's damnatio ad bestias. Throw them to the beasts. Damn them to the beasts. This was the great cry. So the question I want to raise today is, did this really happen? And if it happened, why did it happen? Why was this group singled out? There are a couple of scholars today that dispute it actually happened. They're wrong. I don't believe their evidence works. But I want to start with this man, who I'm sure you all know. Do you know his name? His name is Pliny. Pliny the Younger. Pliny is a very important character. He was born around the year 60 in our era, and he died around 113. He was very educated, came from an aristocratic family, well-off, wealthy, had a lot of important friends. He was the governor of a Roman province. He was the governor of this province. Bithynia, up at the top, you see Bithynia and Pontus. If you see where the X sign is, and just move your eyes over, that's where today Istanbul is, and the sea above it is the Black Sea. This was a very rich area during Pliny's governorship. Pliny is governor there from 109 to 112. His governorship is 3 years. It is an imperial territory. That is, there are provinces that are imperial provinces, and there are provinces that are senatorial. This is an imperial province. And Pliny began to have some troubles. We don't know what happened, but he wrote a famous letter to the emperor, and I'm going to show it to you in a moment. And this letter to the emperor concerned problems that he was having. He apparently was receiving deputations from a number of different tradespeople in Bithynia, particularly the butchers. And they were complaining that people were not offering sacrifices to the gods, and they were going broke. And suddenly he began to get denunciations. He would get letters in the mail saying, Claudius is following someone named Crestus, and they refuse to buy animals. So Pliny, this got worse and worse and worse, and Pliny's, he's a new governor, he doesn't quite know what to do. It's a very sophisticated city. I mean, when we think of Roman cities now, we only imagine ruins, but it would have been a big city, a city of maybe, at that time, 100,000 people, but in a very small compass. So it would have been a densely populated city with a big Circus Maximus, an amphitheater, a forum in the middle of law courts, enormously sophisticated place. Life was good in Bithynia. Life was going along well until this problem emerged, and for Pliny it became a serious problem. So I said he was receiving these denunciations. So Pliny didn't know what to do. So he called in these people who were being denounced, and he began to question them. What's going on? Tell us about it. And he wrote Trajan a famous letter because he was uncertain if he was following Roman law. This is a temple in Bithynia, just to show you the sophistication. This is the temple of Apollo. Inside, you'll see there's a stone wall. Inside that stone wall would have been the liturgical center where the ceremonies would have taken place, honoring the god. But here's the letter. I've translated it, obviously. So he says, my lord, he's writing Trajan, I have never participated in trials of Christians. So he was a lawyer, by the way. This man was a trained lawyer. I therefore do not know what offenses it is the practice to punish or investigate. This is 110. This is very early in Christianity, isn't it? John is only dead 20 years or so. So I don't know how to deal with these people. So he said, so he tells us, he's telling Trajan what he's done. He said, in the case of those who were denounced to me as Christians, that's this anonymous denunciation. You're going to see why that's important. I observed the following procedure. I interrogated these as to whether they were Christians. Those who confessed, I interrogated a second and a third time, threatening them with punishment. Those who persisted, I ordered executed. That's pretty severe, isn't it? So he's not sure if he's behaving appropriately. I ordered them executed. For I had no doubt that whatever the nature of their creed, stubbornness and inflexible obstinate surely deserves to be punished. Well, that's a bit extreme, But at any rate, there were others possessed of the same folly. In Latin, the word folly doesn't work. It is called superstitio. It is our word superstition, but it doesn't mean superstition. It means something much more profoundly extreme than that. There were others of the same folly, but because they were Roman citizens were treated differently within the law. Capital punishment for a Roman citizen was cutting the throat. They were never put into the arena. And then he goes on to say, an anonymous document was published containing the names of many persons. This next bit I've written, earliest non-Christian on the liturgy. This is the earliest remarks we have of what Christians did. So Pliny's saying, what do you people do? You believe in this crest. They didn't know Christ. They call it Crestus. What do you do when you do these things? And he says to Trajan, the sub and substance of their false error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn, sing responsibly a hymn to Christ as to a God, and to bind themselves by oath not to some crime, but not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery, nor falsehood. In other words, basically, they're living a good life. But they're not worshiping the Roman gods. This is a big problem. And for Pliny, he believed them to be what? He believed them to be atheists. You don't worship the gods. You don't believe in all gods. Roman society was inextricably linked. There was no notion of separation of church and state. That was impossible. So he goes on to say, the contagion of this superstition has spread not only to the cities, but also to the villages and farms. But it seems possible to check and cure it. Obviously, he was wrong, right? So even this early in 110, in this part of the world, we see this considerable growth of the Christian church very early on. Now, this is only 3/4 of a century after the execution of Christ. But of course, Pliny, as a Roman aristocrat, knew that Jesus was executed for insurrection, for political malfeasance, for being a bad guy. He was crucified. Crucifixion was a sign of someone who was an evil, someone who was going to betray the state. So Pliny just couldn't get it. How could you worship this man as a god? That's the letter from Pliny to Trajan looks something like this. It's not exactly, it's very difficult to read. It took a long time to translate it. So here's Trajan in all his might. Trajan's a Spanish man. He comes from Seville. He's one of the very best of the Roman rulers. Rules from about 98 to 119. He's a very sober, intelligent, not corrupt, a very good ruler. And wait till you see what he responds. He responds to Pliny. Now, he didn't respond himself. It would be like he went to his attorney general and he said, look, let's look at what Pliny's doing. What do we do? I just wanted to show you one of the reasons. First, let me step back a second. This is his empire. It's vast. It goes from the north of England to Persia. It's a vast, vast empire. All of North Africa, Egypt, all the way to Morocco. Look at all of Spain, Italy, all of the Balkans. It's just enormous. Maybe 1,000 languages were being spoken. Just imagine the administrative complexity of running this without communications. Now, they did have communications, but they didn't have communications like you and I had. So Roman administration was brilliant. It was very sophisticated. But it was also, it would make you go bald. Dealing with this was very, very hard. Making judgments about a world like this. As an empire grows and becomes more complex, Romans began to feel, what does it mean to be Roman? We used to live in Latinium, near Rome. Now we have Sicily, now we have North Africa, now we have Spain, now we have Persia. We have all these different peoples. Are we losing our sense of Romanness? So there's this, as the empire grows, there's a crisis in identity. We see it in the United States. As the country of the United States becomes more mixed and multicultural, there is this sense of, what does it mean to call ourselves an American? Well, Trajan's got this issue. Romans have got this issue. Now imagine in that kind of pool, you've got this other group coming along that says, we really have the truth. We know the truth. And moreover, we can't worship these gods. We can't worship Saturn, Jupiter, Zeus, Hera. We're not able to do that. So Trajan talks to his lawyers, and we know the lawyers' names at this time. They're very good jurists. And the lawyers say, here's Trajan's response. Trajan says, first of all, he has a nice salutation, my dear Pliny, blah, blah, blah. You observe proper procedure, my dear Pliny, in sifting the cause of those who have denounced you as Christians. For it is not possible to lay down any general rule to serve as a kind of fixed standard. So be flexible. They are not to be sought out. Remember, Pliny got these anonymous denunciations. He's being rebuked now. They are not to be sought out, or if they are denounced and proved guilty, they are to be punished. With this reservation that whoever denies that he is a Christian and really proves it, that is by worshiping our gods, even though he was under suspicion in the past, shall obtain pardon through repentance. Another very important, this last sentence. But anonymously posted accusations ought to have no place in any prosecution. For this is both a dangerous kind of precedent and out of keeping with the spirit of our age. If you're going to say that this person is a traitor, if this person is undermining our government, you've got to come forward. You've got to come before the judge and state that. You've got to say, and give your name and say what's going on. I should say at this time when Pliny is hearing this case, they were not using the traditional Roman juris system because the backlog of cases was getting so much bigger because of the size of the empire. So they did something called cognitio extraordinam, which just meant a magistrate could hear a case without having it adjudicated by a jury. He could hear a case and he could make a judgment. By the way, I'm very happy to, if you have a question while I'm talking, it makes for a more interesting conversation. And you remember the English word conversation comes from the Latin to turn towards one another, so it just makes it more fun. So I guess I'm showing you these pictures because I want you to know that people like Pliny that had people educated were sophisticated, well-educated, wealthy people. They were not parvenus. They were not, swinging from trees. They were wealthy. Any of you have been to Europe, to Italy, and seen Roman homes? They're just simply, some of them are astonishing. I worked in this area in North Africa called Duga and Bularegia, and this is close to the Sahara. So what the Romans did very sensibly, they said, well, it's very hot during the day, so we'll dig our homes underground, or palatial underground homes, but our bedrooms will be on the top floor because at night it cools off. So you can go down these stairs and find these sumptuous homes underground. So I'm just showing you that they were quite amazing. And all of the homes below ground have fabulous mosaics everywhere. Now, what does the word religion mean? You can't look at the screen. No cheating. What does religion mean?
It would depend on if you're talking about Methodist religion, Catholic, it would depend on which religion.
Do you know what religion means?
This is a Methodist church.
The word religion. Do you know what it means? It comes from this verb. It comes from the verb to bind. Ligo ligare. And think about that for a moment. Aren't you bound to some way, in some ways? You go to church 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. So there's a binding. And I think that's important to think about. Now, Romans recognized many kinds of religions. They were pluralists. They were quite open to religion. This is the interesting anomaly with the Christians. So, but they had this idea, it can either be an okay religion, and I'm kind of messing up the translation, religio licita, or it can be an unapproved religion, illicita. Now, how did that work? So take Jews, for example. There were a considerable number of Jews living within the Roman Empire, right? In Rome. Rome had no problem with Jews. Jews were able to practice their religion. They were not forced to swear allegiance to the emperor. They were not asked to worship the gods. They were not asked to do any of those things. Well, then why were these Christians asked to do these things? Remember, early Christians are Jews, right? And the Romans thought they were kind of crackpot Jews, Jews that got off the rails. But they didn't see them as Christians. They really don't emerge fully as Christians until around Pliny's time. So in the early period, they thought they were just Jews, little eccentric Jews, which is probably true. One of the reasons that the Romans were troubled by Christians and not Jews is that the Christians were evangelical. So the Jews were not interested in going out into the hitherland and converting people to Judaism. And the Christians were vocal in their opposition to sacrifice to the gods. Because you were asked to sacrifice to the gods. And sacrifice to the gods simply meant that you went up to the temple and there was incense, you put incense in the fire and you poured a libation and you swore allegiance to the genius of the emperor. That was it. But Christians refused to do that. So as the Christian community is growing and they're evangelical, the Roman authorities are getting a lot of what Pliny got. Why are these people so populous? Look, they're hurting our economy. People are not buying sacrificial animals. They won't worship our gods. They also thought that they were atheists. What else did they accuse them of? This should be something you should know. What happens during the Eucharist? What do these people do? So if you tell someone, by the way, it's Sunday morning, I have to go drink some blood and eat someone's body, I'm not being facetious. They were accused, I could show you the argument from Tacitus, that they were cannibals. Now, the truth of the matter is, sophisticated Romans knew they were cannibals. But if you have a growing group of people, and you want to marginalize them, and you want to push them out, you want to suppress them, you've got to come up with some really draconian charges. Atheism, big one, because that means you don't support the state. Cannibals, one other one, because in the early church they used to, I don't know if Methodist students, they used to do this, what they called the kiss of peace. And they would do it amongst familial kin. And the Romans found that deeply appalling, that kind of sign of affection. So they thought, they accused them of incest. That's a pretty unholy trinity. Cannibalism, atheism, and incest. Where do you go with that? I mean, you're done, right? So, and you've got an open and accommodating society that suddenly has to deal with these groups that are being largely, through word of mouth, condemned. The other thing you need to know is that when the persecutions really get going, and they really get going in the beginning of the 3rd century, there are other issues that are happening that allow the Romans to do this. Roman society is under enormous pressure. Enormous pressure. I just want to quickly show you, I don't have a little, but you see where Germania Magna and Sarmatia is, right? Where all the green is with the red border, that's called the Roman limes. Now, if that's Roman territory, that means you have to have soldiers all along there, right? You have to have forts all along there. Likewise in England. But they can't maintain it because we've got people coming in from all of that gray area, pushing on the limes, attacking them, fighting them. They have to withdraw all of the troops from all of the legions from England. What happens when you go out in the cold in the wintertime to your extremities?
You have to dress more.
Your hands and your feet get cold. Why? The blood supply wants to go to protect the heart. So Rome is under siege, so it's bringing it's collapsing its limes, and it's bringing people closer to the heart. Italia, you've got to save the central core, right? So if you've got this happening, not because of Christianity, but all of these other marauding tribes, and you've got within your empire a group that's growing from the inside, you can see how this is going to create a combustible force, and it does. And so they begin to operate, as Pliny did, to kill people, to execute people. I'm looking at it because Amy said there's a man with a book that comes out here, and if I'm not out here, I'm not. What is the Christian response to this? What do Christians do? I was looking at a movie called Quo Vadis, Do any of you remember that movie? It's an old, Peter Ustinov plays a very bad Nero. And it shows you these Christians being eaten by lions and they're singing songs while they're being eaten. It's a bit over the top. I couldn't get a clip of it in here. I wanted to. What is the Christian response to this? It's very interesting. They come up with this idea of volitional martyrdom. That is to say, we're not going to flee. We're going to stand here and we're going to announce, declaim our Christianity. And in fact, this man at the very bottom, Tertullian, I'm translating his words right now, he wrote a very important treatise called De Fuga in Persecutione, concerning flight and persecution. He says you cannot flee, don't run, give yourselves up. So this idea, and I've written the Greek there, martus, martyrdom comes from the word for witness. And in ancient Greek, it just means a courtroom scene. But Christians turn it around, and they take witness to mean blood witness. And its origins are in Judaism. If you know the book of Maccabees, you'll know that in Maccabees, two Maccabees, very important figure of Eleazar, who is persecuted by the Persian king Antiochus, who says, I want you to eat pork. And Eleazar refuses. And he says, I can't do that. I've lived my whole life following the law. So they said, we'll kill you. He said, it's okay, take my life. And so they killed him. And then there's another figure in Maccabees called the Maccabean mothers. The Maccabean mother, and she lets her sons die because she will not violate the rules of Judaism. Christians, Jesus knew this book very well. Christ knew Maccabees quite well and probably influenced his thinking. And also Daniel, very important book for early Christians. So they see that they've got some scriptural basis for this idea of volitional martyrdom. Also, if you know Acts, the figure of Stephen in Acts, it is basically, I've written down here someplace, imitato Christi. There it is, imitato Christi. So even as early as Stephen, and Stephen dies probably sometime around 50, I guess. And he follows Christ and even echoes Christ's words. So they developed this idea that, well, it may not be good to die for Christ, but it's important to die for Christ. And they come up with four crucial ideas. Not only, by the way, is it based on Judaism, but also on the pagan idea of exitus illustrium virorum. It means just the death of a virtuous man or a woman. And there were a lot of people, Cato, Seneca, Socrates, who lived good lives of principle, but who, rather than give up their principles, sacrifice themselves. But Christians came up with this response. You have as a martyr, you become a soldier of Christ, miles Christi. Now, one of the things that they came up with theologically, if you die as a martyr, you go immediately to a union with God. Immediately. Early Christianity do not believe that when you die, you go to heaven. Early Christians believed that when you die, you went to Hades. And then you stayed in Hades till the second coming. Not true for martyrs. Martyrs went immediately to heaven. They also believed that when you were being persecuted in the arena, that Christ became fully present in your body. Absolutely present. Literally present. And we have texts, I could show them to you, which says, Jesus was with me at the moment of greatest suffering. The other thing they believe is that when the suffering becomes very severe, there'll be a kind of general anesthesia given and a kind of analgesic. You'll enter this kind of analgesic state. We have many, many documents that report this sort of thing happening. So the Romans don't know what to make of this, because these people are going into the amphitheater and, not quite singing as in Quo Vadis, but they seem immune to the violence perpetrated on them. And so the Romans are quite shocked by all of this. I have to go quickly because it's 10:20. I'll just go very quickly. This is an amphitheater. Amphitheaters exist all over the Roman Empire. This is one I know well. This is in a place in South Tunisia. 40,000 people could sit in that amphitheater. 40,000 people. There were probably not 40,000 people in the town. It's the biggest, you can see the present Arab city around it. It hovers way up above the city. It's a phenomenal building. It's in much better shape than the Colosseum in Rome. I want you just to notice this in this big rectangular hole in the middle. That would have been grated because animals would have been kept under there. And this is below that. I walked underneath and took a picture from above. And there would have been dumbwaiters bringing animals or gladiators or whoever was going to be in the amphitheater up. And there's one of the cells below ground where you can see sort of recesses in the walls where prisoners were kept, gladiators were kept, animals were kept. There's a mosaic from El Gem, that place is called El Gem, of showing gladiatorial combat. Romans like blood sports. Greeks don't like blood sports to the same extent. Romans were fascinated with blood, and therefore we get these gladiatorial combats. This is a mosaic of this is a 2nd century mosaic in Africa of a man being, looks like he's on some sort of a mini chariot and he's being attacked by a leopard. The Romans used all sorts of animals. In fact, the trade in animals was so great that the Numidian lion, which is a native North African lion, went extinct because of the amount of trade in animals. This is a mosaic from the catacombs showing, we don't know who, but a Christian being savaged by a lion. We know it happened. It happened, and okay, so it's 10:23. I've got 2 minutes. It happened for a confluence of events, historical circumstances. The Roman Empire was going through great struggle at the time. Christianity was a militant kind of evangelical group who simply, I mean, if you look at the Roman trials, I was reading one document where 6 Christians were brought in before the magistrate, and the magistrate says to them, well, look, what's going on here? And they said, well, we can't worship your gods. They're just these wooden idols. And we have the documents of a good man named Paul. So they named Paul, and they had scrolls of Paul. And it's Paul and Paul's Redeemer, Christ, that we worship. So the magistrate says to them, but if you don't worship our gods, you're betraying the state. And the speaker says, so be it. So the magistrate says, look, why don't you go home and think this over and come back and we can have a better conversation. Actually dismisses the case. He says, no, we refuse to leave. So he has to sentence them to death. He sentenced them to execution. And then that execution was having their throats cut. That document dates from 180. It's the earliest Latin Christian execution document we have. The earliest ones we get of real persecution start around 110, slightly after Pliny, where we actually get written documents with eyewitnesses who watched it happen. So when do the persecutions end? First of all, I should say there is no empire-wide persecution. No emperor decides we're going to persecute till 249. That's the first time we get imperial-wide. We have sporadic persecution starting with Nero in 64. 249, the empire says, now we're going to persecute them. The last vestige of persecution starts under Diocletian in 303 and ends with Constantine in about 314. So there are persecutions from 64 to 314. 2 major ones from 249 continuing to 313. Yeah. And these people became, as Tertullian says, the martyrs of the blood seed of the church. And they gave substance to early Christianity.